Welcome to the Blake Edwards podcast. I am your humble and gracious host, Blake Edwards, and today we have on a very special guest today. His name is George Hamilton. He is the CEO of Hollywood Hamilton Clothing. And how are you doing today, man?
I'm good, man. It's good to see you again, dude.
Good to see you as
It's been a while.
well. Yeah, I was real excited just to do this episode just because of our history and us meeting during the pandemic when I had moved into your spot as an Airbnb. And thank you for actually just inviting me in your home and letting me figure out life at the time. Like, I just really appreciate that. It felt like family because I was there for so long at the time.
Yeah, I mean, for us, like, you know, we've had so many conversations outside of, you know, podcast stuff, but, you know, from Airbnb, we meet so many cool people. And, you know, I think how we kind of set up our space, we want, you know, people that are like-minded. And, you know, since you had so much time to spend with us, it was super cool that we could chop it up so many times, talk business, life, whatever it is. So when you're like, hey, let's do this podcast, you're like, how many times have we had this conversation? So,
right, exactly.
You know, let's do it.
No, but one of the first things I did want to ask you is just so people like get an idea of like who you are, where you're from. So like, where are you from? I'm pretty sure you were born in New Jersey.
Yeah. So I live here down in Tampa now. Been here almost 8 years, but I grew up in New Jersey. Did my college up there, and then came to grad school here in Tampa. And then once I came for grad school, I stayed ever since and bought houses and kind of planted roots here. So Tampa's the spot and really love it and see myself being here for a while. So
no, I feel you. What really made you decide to come down to Tampa? Was it just the weather? Because I know that was one of my main things when I was deciding school. I don't want to be up north where it's snowing, bad weather. Like Florida's nice. Really the South in general is just like ideal for like weather. But like what were the aspects that made you want to come to Tampa?
No, it was funny when we were talking before. For me, I had done my undergrad pretty close to home. And for the most part, like I always had that crutch of kind of being, you know, close to home, close to family, friends. My college that I went to was like 2 hours, hour and a half away. So you were always, if you needed something there. But I originally had done my first kind of jobs outside of college up in New York City. And I was like, you know what, there's still so much to learn. You know, for me, having the entrepreneurial side, I'm like, this just doesn't feel right. And I was like, if I'm going to kind of go and take that education to the next level, I'm like, I want to get outside of my elements and kind of pick somewhere that, you know, I don't have a crutch to fall on. Like it's either all me to blame or all me to kind of, you know, pat yourself on the back and be like, hey, I did it. So when I was looking at spots, I was looking out in California, Texas, Florida, and I was only in Tampa once before for a soccer tournament when I was in high school. And at that time, Tampa has changed so much in the last even just couple years now.
Believe it.
But when I came down and we checked out the school, I was like, this is it. You know, it's a good city. It's small, but it has a big city feel in certain aspects, but the small city perks. So I was like, this is perfect. So
no, and it's funny that you say that because I think one of the more important things when you're around that age of 18, 19, you just graduated from high school, I feel like one thing people often do is that they stay like in their roots, they stay in the town that they grew up in. And one of the main things that my family kind of pushed me towards, like my mom, my grandfather, like they were saying like, oh, you should go to school outside of Atlanta because I grew up here. I grew up in Atlanta my whole life. And I mean, I've grown up, because really I grew up in Gwinnett County, Lawrenceville, and then moved to North Atlanta. So I've seen like the majority of the city for like what it is. And I think one of the important things for me was just growing outside of my comfort zone in a way. So when I was looking at colleges, we mainly looked in Florida. We started all the way down to Miami and just kind of drove up north and hit the different spots. But when I had got to Tampa, I was just like, the town was amazing. It wasn't too big. It's definitely not the size of like something like Atlanta or New York City, but it just has like this crazy vibe to it. And it's not like a fast city. It's very chill, mellow.
Yeah. There's something about Tampa, right? Like it's different, but it's a good different.
Exactly, and it's just like, and it's often the cut too, because even if you hear Tom Brady, like when he was talking about it, he was like, I didn't know this was all down here like that. But like when you really just stay in the city, like for even just a month, you really just fall in love with it. You know what I mean? And that was kind of the position I was in, especially when I was going to school down at University of Tampa. So that was mainly the main reason why I came down here, just to kind of grow outside of my roots. So I feel like we could relate in a way, in the sense that, you know, I need to grow outside of my comfort zone and see what I could do in different places.
I mean, that to me is a huge point where you don't realize if you come from a small city or, you know, what your roots were, you don't realize how small of a city you might have came from, or how different the world can be, or just really, the opportunities that are out there. When I was in college, most of my friends, since we're South Jersey, so close to Philadelphia, my kind of plan was originally come to UT, get my master's degree, come back up and maybe work in Philly, or go back to New York, or as clothing started, maybe go to LA. But it was just something about Tampa, and just in general of kind of, once you get your own roots and start to kind of plant your own seeds and start to see these things grow, it not to say there's anything bad about staying in the town you grew up in, but it's just, there's a lot of things that just feel, not to say small-minded, but it just feels like this little enclosure around you. Like once you break through there, it's so different, but a good different. And for me, it's like, if anybody, takes that leap of faith and they're not sure, what's the worst that can happen?
No, exactly.
You just literally go back to where, you came from and do the same thing. I'd say branch out and give it a shot. So.
Right. No, I feel like another big part of it is just kind of seeing the world, because when you do grow up in a town, and again, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's like you're kind of in a bubble in a way. Like, and another thing for me was I just want to see what it's like being in different places and seeing what it's like to be just submersed in different cultures, because even just Atlanta, and I'm sure you've been around different places, like even up in New Jersey compared to down here, like culture in different states, it really is a big difference when you actually start to travel and see the different kind of people and environments. So that was really another big thing that I did see when I did come down here. But when you did decide to come down to Tampa, did you know that you want to go to University of Tampa, or was that, were looking around at different schools to get your graduation?
No, it was pretty much UT. At the time I was looking at like Pepperdine, I was looking at University of Pennsylvania School of Business, bunch of different schools, and for me, I looked at Miami as well, and my scores and everything were good, so I was just trying to figure out where I wanted to go, and at that point, I kind of liked that big fish in a small pond kind of feel. I liked UT, it was kind of the same size as my undergrad, but definitely a different environment. So for me, it was like, not to say like a vacation, but you knew like, hey, this is gonna be a different feel, but when I got there, I wasn't even sure, hey, am I smart enough? Am I, strong-minded enough to like get an MBA? Like at that time, I wasn't sure. You're thinking like UT is very diverse in their MBA program and stuff like that. So you had kids from all over the world, and you say kids, young adults, people going back for their degrees. So a lot of smart people, and UT has been climbing up those ranks for School of Business. How well it is in the country. So for me, I was like, man, can I do this? And it was just a nice spot. And UT was my only choice here in Tampa, not USF. I looked at UCF, and that just didn't do it for me. But
Definitely.
This was it.
Now what degree was your master's?
Yeah.
What did you choose for your master's degree in?
So business administration. It's a little bit of everything. My undergrad, I did business. So at that point, it was basically just taking that and extending it a little bit further. At that time, an MBA covers finance, accounting, marketing, business development, leadership. So for me, I thought it was really good because at 21, 18, 23, wherever you are, you're still trying to figure out, what you want to do for the rest of your life.
Exactly.
And for me, it was a great way to kind of get my feet wet in so many different things and go, yeah, I don't really like accounting, but it's great for a cornerstone of business. But then you can start to fine tune. And for me, I think getting an MBA, I know a lot of people, I'm a big Gary Vee proponent, stuff like that.
Oh my God, let me tell you, I wanted to say that during the episode too. Like, you remind me so much of Gary Vee. I wasn't sure if you knew him, but like, it's just funny that you know him. But like, you remind me so much of him, just like your hustle and mindset and all those different sort of things.
Well, and the cool thing about that, where Gary Vee's like, he'll shoot it to you straight. And for me, you hear a lot of these guys that are, like quote unquote, like gurus that are like, you should quit your job, do what you want to do. And in a lot of ways, you have to look at yourself and kind of figure out what's my mentality? How strong am I in terms of like, if I quit my job tomorrow, am I going to get up at 6 a.m. and go to my new office of my new job? Or am I going to sleep in? Like certain people need structure. So for that kind of stuff, it was just like, like I just looked at that and I'm like, for me, business and all that stuff within UT and getting around all these different people, you're tapping into all that stuff. And for those kind of guys, I'm like, no, you gotta figure out yourself and look in the mirror and kind of push yourself to do certain things. But at the same time, you got to know, like, I'm not good at doing that, but I'm also really good at doing this. So kind of finding that spot. I'm a big proponent of getting yourself out there and entrepreneurship in general. But for me, grad school opened so many doors where I won a finance competition at UT. And without doing that, I probably wouldn't be here as long as I am, for the fact that when we took that competition, we wound up winning the whole state of Florida. And then that got me my first job. And now that actually, after other things in the background, has gotten me to where I am right now. But without that opportunity of grad school, I don't know where I would have been, right? So I look at that and you go, it may not be the university and that degree that got me there, but it's the opportunity of being at school, doing all of those things that just said, hey, being in this environment with these people took me where I was going, So I think for that, if you look at the opportunity and the environment, what you have on hand, think about if you had to go start your business right now, no college. Yeah, you're paying, all your startup stuff. You got to pay for your office, all that. And now there's obviously a cost to college. But think about all the free resources, faculty, other students, internships, all that stuff that you're like, well, I can get my degree and maximize talking about this in my classes or partnering with a project with other students. And now I can build my business, learn, and build connections. So you got to look at like what does school give you? And I think for that, I think it was worth it for me.
Well, I feel like one of the things about that too is that most people, they don't actually take advantage of all the options and resources that a school actually gives you. Because I know plenty of students that still go to UT, but they just go to the class and party, and that's just about all they do.
Check in, check out, right?
Exactly. But like, if you do take advantage of those different opportunities, like the faculty and just the resources that they have to get you internships at other places, like I feel like that's really one of the main things people really should be taking from college, but they don't, in a sense, because it's like, these first 4 years I'm gonna have to kind of myself before I start my life. So they want to enjoy it as much as possible, but I think having a healthy balance of, trying to figure out what you want to do and also having your fun is important too, because you don't want to go through college just partying and that's all you're doing and just getting good grades, but like by the time you're done, you're like, oh, I have to jump into life. But you could have been kind of figuring that out along the way. So I think that's kind of one of the things that people kind of miss when they are going to school in a way. And I also just love to hear, like you say, like all the positive things that do kind of come with school, because I feel like one of the main questions kind of just in today's society is college worth it? You know what I mean? So like,
it's a big expense. And
exactly. It's the three biggest like investments kind of people make in life. It's college, car, and a house.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, me, I like to have fun for sure. My biggest thing with that was, out of college, I played soccer in my undergrad. So, 18-year-old George compared to 24-year-old George, in college is two different people. And I definitely think that you can't just go one or the other. I think you have to have that fine balance. If you're going to work hard and, study and do all that, I think you got to have those outlets to give yourself a break. You got to be able to look in the mirror and go, hey, am I doing too much partying over too much, studying? And the same thing, vice versa. If you're studying all the time and just get anxiety, stressed out, and then, it probably puts you in another spot to, maybe put it in a negative way of like, college is just draining me. So I think for that, as long as you look at yourself and go, hey, I'm putting myself in a good mix, I think you have to have that.
No, definitely. And when after you completed the your finance competition, which helped you land a job, was it at a investment bank or was it at?
No, so before I came to UT, my first internship was actually with Merrill Lynch.
Okay.
So I had a kind of a finance background. Definitely, once I got there, I'm like, that was more obviously of the wealth management side. But I knew, hey, there's still some stuff I don't know. So that's where I went to UT and obviously kind of touched on a lot of those things. But what my first job was, like I said, we won that finance competition, and it was Association of Corporate Growth. So talked about Gary Vee. Another big thing that I like is Shark Tank. So it's very similar to like a Shark Tank kind of vibe and experience. So it was like, hey, you have, I think it was a week, you're kind of locked in the room with your 4 teammates in that aspect. And it was, hey, you have to look at this business. Is this deal that's on the table worth it? You're doing the financial projections, the modelings, the discounted cash flows, things like that to kind of put the offer as it is here. But it was cool because it had other elements of like, so-and-so owner wants 100% out. They're done with the business. They just want to retire, So-and-so wants, still wants to have some leadership stake, so they want to stay on with the company. So what we were able to do is provide, is the valuation good? And then what would we recommend if it wasn't? And then how would we kind of structure the deal? So it was definitely a finance competition. But what I did is, at the time, oil was still doing well. And it was a company that was based here in Tampa, brand new company that was doing oil field services in Texas. So for that, it was doing a lot of financial stuff, basically like an analyst for the company. But we were so small, we were like 7, 8 people. We were doing accounting, we were doing some marketing type stuff. We were wearing a lot of different hats because it was actually myself and another teammate of mine. But it wasn't an exact finance company, it was oil. But I learned so much from that first kind of experience where, you kind of touch on so many different things, kind of a startup environment, but had a lot of financial, what my background was, with some other stuff that, I really didn't know as well. But you're able to have a good boss and good leadership to kind of point you in that direction. So
no, definitely. And now one of the things I did want to kind of ask was sorry, why am I forgetting this? But why am I forgetting this? Sorry.
You're good, man.
Oh, my bad. Sorry, I always chop some of this out anyway. But so one of the things I did want to ask you is, how would you best describe like what it is you actually do in the financial sector? Is it banking or like?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. I'll give you like a short rundown. Obviously, you guys know that I, do clothing. That's one of my big things. My other stuff that I do is real estate. But my background, I've always been a corporate guy as well. There's definitely some things about that people are like, oh, you still have a corporate job. But I went from oil actually into property preservation, so kind of bank-owned properties. Again, still having to do with banks and finance, which is kind of funny. Then I went to Kforce, and I was working as basically a business analyst as well, with more of like the staffing type stuff. So that was cool. And then from there, I came over to the bank. I've worn a lot of different hats and titles with the bank, which is really cool. When I originally started, I was doing all the financial modeling and all of the analysis for the bank, more definitely finance type stuff. I did that for a little bit. And then from there, as the bank has grown, our bank has grown significantly in the last 4 years, and I've been with them that long. Now what I'm doing is full-blown marketing. I'm our VP of brand marketing for the bank. But like I said, I came in from finance.
Yep.
I was doing all the financial modeling analysis, working with our controller and COO and all that fun stuff. More technical, formulas, everything that you think of like from a finance. And then when I talked to my CEO, and he goes, and I was telling him about my Airbnb properties, and one of the things that I did in my Airbnbs, instead of me having to go and buy all of the furniture, the accessories, the paintings, everything, I have so many cool artist buddies. I was like, give me your paintings. I want them in my house, and I'll sell them. Right. I don't want any money. I want you guys to take the full gain, because you're saving me all of this other stuff.
Exactly.
And it was funny because we sold, I think, our first guests, like $2,000 worth of paintings.
Wow, that's ridiculous.
Concept proven right there. And when I was telling my CEO about, kind of these other things that I had, whether it was clothing, whether it was the Airbnbs, he was like, we need help with marketing analysis. So I kind of slowly transitioned to more marketing numbers. And then from there, it was getting my hands on more of the marketing materials and the marketing message. And now I'm a full-blown brand marketing manager, 100% of like what the brand is, what that image is going forward, both internally and externally. So it all kind of ties together. If you look at my background of kind of knowing the business side of like your technical Shark Tank, Gary Vee type things, but then your creative side of like, you know, creating your own business, running your own business, and then kind of building and developing a brand. So it all kind of goes hand in hand, and it kind of fits me as like almost in a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde of like corporate versus entrepreneur, kind of do your own thing. So it kind of all comes together.
And it's funny that you say that, because one of the main things I always thought is that, because, you know, if you're starting to build a business and because you're still working, because obviously most people, they can't just quit their job and just hop right into entrepreneurship and then just be successful, you know what I mean? But like, do you think the success that you have within your actual business helps at all, as far as, you know, telling the CEO of the bank, like, oh, I could do this, and these are the different things I could do because I'm doing it in my business, and because you're kind of stepping in different areas and you're showing that it actually works. So if it's proven concept that it's working for you, it could also be held as proven concept for the actual business, if that makes sense.
No, I think there's definitely pros and cons, right? When you look at everything from a high level, there's a couple of things that kind of come into play. When it comes to going back to, you know, let's say a company versus you have to understand your corporate culture, where you don't want to compete with the company you're already working with, right? Because that's just a conflict of interest. The second thing is that if you look at it and you go, hey, I have these other ventures, if your leadership feels that you're being taken away from your job duty, they may look at that as a negative, right? So first you got to understand, you know, hey, is my company mind, or do, you know, are they pushing me to be more entrepreneurial, do my own things, further my career, or are they trying to lock me into this position? The great thing about the company I'm with now, they're totally supportive of that. What I think you have to do as well is you have to set fine lines, right? Like, I'm not going to work on other businesses on different business times. So that's obviously a con in one of the senses of whether you're working corporate, working your own, you know, you're going to have to balance those pieces and understand, you know, I'm spending a lot of time on this versus spending a lot of time over here when I could. But from the pro, I am a big proponent, kind of going back to what I said, of not just jumping into things if you're not ready. Because, you know, when you look at that, I have a lot of friends that all run their businesses, whether startups, whether successful, you know, locally small business owned things, that they're absolutely killing it. But there's so many things that you can learn and benefit from a start out of your basement or your garage or your back office or whatever you have, an extra spare room in your house. Because you got to look at it from the other aspect, right? You're working for a company, you have health insurance, you have a 401k, you have leadership that you're going to learn from. These are, you know, depending on how big the company is you work for right now, you're looking at, well, I could either learn how to run my business and scale to be just like this, or you learn from the negatives and go, I don't want to do this. I want to implement this kind of stuff. So starting your own thing, and if you were one person and you somehow came to, let's say, 50 people and you never worked corporate culture, you wouldn't know what that experience is, versus actually living it and kind of saying, well, hey, I have great roots to kind of get myself and take a step at a time. But if you're starting your own business, if you have to pay for private health insurance, you don't have a 401k match. That's all on you. Think about all these things that you could do at the same time, that you go, I could take all of the capital that I have, save some of that, and dump it into my business, work nights and weekends, grind. It's going to be tough, but think about, you're able to kind of take a stepping stone, and you may not be taking big leaps like you would of just jumping in and working day in and day out, but you're able to make some nice plateaus and kind of get there. So for me, I am a huge proponent of, you know, again, kind of going back, making sure that your corporate culture doesn't look at that as a negative. But if you're in a place that thrives and says, hey, go for it, we're big fans of kind of having like these entrepreneurial mindset. I think it's a great way to kind of start. So for me, I've been very, very lucky to be with companies that have always done that in the background.
Supported you.
I've always been very open with that. I've never tried to hide anything. That's kind of always been me. So it's kind of, I think in that aspect, if you are open with it, you'll know right away if the company supports it or doesn't. And obviously, like I said, having a fine line and being able to disconnect one from the other definitely helps as well.
Have you ever had a time where you actually were transparent with the company that I have a business that I do on the side, it's clothing, and they ever was like, oh, we're not kind of interested? Have you ever came across any of those kind of situations before?
Not specific in that aspect. It's kind of funny because on certain days, like if I have, let's say, PTO, I'll take that and go work on my business if I have something. So that's good. I don't just cut it off. But there's been, out of the couple of companies I worked with before, there was definitely some work environments that I was like, it's kind of funny. I've used this scenario multiple times talking about this, but it was like, Blake, you could have won the lottery, became a millionaire overnight, walked into work that next day, and still had the worst day of your life. And that to me just said so much about that company that I was like, I never wanted to be in that environment, and I shortly left. But that you got to be in a place, whether it's about business or personal stuff, that they got to be supportive. You got to want to work there. With whether you're a pro athlete, whether you're in finance or accounting, there's going to be things that are mundane, right? If you're a pro athlete, it's like, oh, I get to do X, Y, and Z. But there's going to be stuff that you go, this is the worst part of my job.
The media part of it. They hate it.
Yeah. And whatever it is, right? There's always mundane stuff, but that's with everything. And you take it for what it is. But I've never had anybody that would, go and say, no, I really don't like that. But I've never kind of put myself in a position that, would ever hinder that.
No, exactly. Now, being that you're a VP of like marketing and branding and that sort of thing right now, can you see yourself, is that where you like really like love to do right now? Do you see you can see yourself working in that position for your company you're working with right now, like for a good like chunk of your career, or would you want to ever defer back to finance at all?
No, it's cool. I think, as everyone always says, it's like you talk to somebody who's a little bit older, a little bit more established in their career, and they always kind of say, well, how'd you get here? And it wasn't a straight path. It was kind of cool because if you look at everything that I've kind of, talked about today and kind of my background, it all kind of has little bits and pieces of entrepreneurship, marketing, finance. They all kind of intertwine. And I think, as I've evolved, when, I started designing clothes, I wasn't saying I was a fashion designer. I didn't know about building a brand. You start to kind of get into things and you go, you know what, I really like doing this. And then as you kind of get and understand branding and some of those elements, working for the bank and things like that, you start to fine tune and you go, hey, I really like doing this. So for me, I think marketing kind of found me as, clothing is way different than a particular product, right? Like, let's talk toothbrush. You don't walk with that toothbrush around. You don't tell your friends about it.
Exactly.
It's a toothbrush. It's a transaction in that part of your day. Hey, I did it, and I go about my day. Clothing, you're wearing it, right? Like, you see the logos. It's out there in your face. Anybody who supports it, the more you wear it, it's a walking billboard. So in that aspect, it's just been kind of cool to kind of build more on the branding side and kind of develop that, where banking is obviously a little bit different. We're not a sexy product, right? I mean, everybody typically has a bank account, but you just think of it as a supplemental product and part of your life. Not something that you're gonna rave about. But there's definitely still ways to create unique branding around a bank and around financial products that you can still connect to, whether you're, a 10-year-old in a kids club or 50 in a, almost like a retired account or something like that. So there's definitely ways that you can talk to different personas, and, every bank is different. So not to say it's a challenge, but it's cool because even if you took 10 different banks, they have 10 different images. They could be youthful, they could be, high class. You walk in, it's marble and we're a wealthy type bank versus, hey, we're the bank for everybody. So for me, I think that once I'm now into marketing, it's kind of a cool spot where you can start to develop the different brands, and then it becomes cool that you're able to take a brand from here and take it to a different, kind of image, and how I perceive it originally or how you perceive it originally. Well, how do you perceive it now? So I think it's definitely pretty cool. And I think compared to the finance side, it's always A plus B equals C, right? The formula is always going to be the same. But for branding, you're typically stepping outside of the box and basically saying, well, what is everybody else doing? And how do we stay close enough that we're not so different that people go, this isn't right? But how do we stray far enough away that you go, this is unique and I like what they're doing?
No, definitely. Now, have you always had like the entrepreneurial mindset, like the hustler's mindset, like ever since you were a kid, or was there a certain point in a time where you thought you wanted to be a doctor, or did you always know that you want to be an entrepreneur at the end of the day?
There was definitely a point in time where it kind of switched. When I kind of talked about here in my undergrad, I was definitely, hey, when I had a summer job, I took all my money and I spent it on dumb things. I definitely was not a saver. And I remember, having conversations with my dad. He'd be like, you don't need to buy that. You don't have to, save your money, do these things. And it was kind of funny because when I came into college, when I originally talked about UT and kind of starting my master's program, my clothing brand really was still selling t-shirts. When I had started the brand, it was in college, basically creating t-shirts because there were certain elements about other brands that I liked, but then other things that I'm like, oh, I like their fit, but I don't like their designs.
Exactly.
Or I like these guys' designs, but the t-shirts are too boxy, or you wash them once and they're not good. So when I came to UT, even in certain classes where you had a project and it was like, take a business and do this, or create a marketing project based on this brand. And I remember one of my professors, he was like, why are you choosing this company? Why don't you persuade your classmates to work on your brand and use that as an example?
Yeah.
And for me, it was kind of a little bit of a turning point because you're like, oh, I've always thought of it as like, it's something small. It's not really a big deal. But it was kind of nice because you had other people kind of like starting to see elements of it. And I remember kind of getting it out to people at UT who really didn't know anything about my brand. And as of talking about it and involving it in other projects, it kind of came to be where I started to change my mindset of like actually turning into a company. And actually one of my old bosses at the time, as again, I was always forthcoming with what I was doing with my brand. And he was like, well, could you use a little bit of money to start it up? And obviously having the background of finance and, cash flows and what company valuations are worth, we weren't doing a ton of revenue, but we were, building a brand and getting more recognition. And it was kind of funny because I'm like, well, I could, take this loan, and give them a piece of equity. And it was over six-figure, kind of loan amount and at the time, I also had to look at it and you go, what I said a little bit earlier about knowing, what you can and can't do. I actually had said, I was like, I'm working for you. I don't want to have that conflict of interest now for the fact that I don't want you to think that I care more about my brand in this aspect now that I have money tied to that when I'm always working for you 9 to 5, right? So I definitely always had an entrepreneurial mindset of trying to do things. I would say that, yes, it's probably what I've had inside, but my grandfather started his own business. My dad took over that business. So I definitely have to credit it to, maybe some inherited genes and the, maybe the mindsets of my dad and my grandpa. But I definitely think it's something that you either have or don't have. Not to say, like, if you talk about artists or something like that, some of these artists, you either are creative or you're not, right? Like sometimes it's hard to force, but I think I've always had something in there, but there's definitely a couple of turning points that I have looked at to say, you know what, like turn the entrepreneurial, like business side a little bit more. And I think once you get in it and once you start to, just like any other hobby, once you start to like it, you spend more time on it.
Exactly.
So I think it only grows that much more.
Now, how did you feel? How was the feeling? Because I'm sure you felt ecstatic because even when people are telling me like, oh, that was a great episode, or I get just certain like positive input, like I just get fired up about it. But what was it like to actually like receive like an offer for like an equity position? Like, were you like, oh, like I'm doing the right things, like I'm moving in the right direction with the brand? Like, what was that feeling like? Because I know you probably felt ecstatic just to get that.
It was definitely cool because obviously you feel like, hey, it's not just me doing something and no one appreciates it. In that aspect, it was a lot of like, what ifs? Should I do this? Like nerves, because you're like, now it's you're up to the plate, right? Like, am I going to swing and hit a home run, or am I going to strike out?
Definitely.
At the same time, you're like, well, is it my turn to even bat? And for me, I actually turned that away because I said, if I build this brand and it takes off or grows a little bit more, I'm like, what would that have been worth later on? At the same time, if you bring in different outside leadership and equity stake, your creativity essentially changes. Now you have somebody else that their money's on the line. Not to say that controls you, but may have to sway you. It was definitely cool of saying, hey, it's moving in that right direction. I think some of the cooler pieces, though, honestly, as a clothing brand versus a different company, it's those small things of seeing people out and wearing it and not just keeping it in your drawer. Those are the big wins.
Those are the best moments.
For sure. For me, I can't say that about every brand, but what I will say is if I get a call or text and someone's like, hey, I'm at the Atlanta airport and I saw somebody wearing your shirt. I don't live in Atlanta.
Right.
I don't have ties to Atlanta. We have, online store and things like that we're selling all over the place. But to be able to see it, that's just so cool to me that not only does the person that, actually purchased the clothes connect with, but then somebody who I either went to school with or worked with or, somebody I'm friends with sees it, identifies it, recognizes it. And at the same time, I've had people have conversations being like, hey, I know that guy that started the brand. And they go, yeah, me too. And, they could be out at a bar or something. Next thing they're having drinks or, they form friendships. So that to me, there's so many cool things about it. But building a brand in general and just, all those little wins that you have and kind of pointing yourself in that right direction, I think they all kind of add up to, not to say pat yourself on the back, but say, hey, I think I'm doing something right.
No, definitely. Now, what really made you want to start Hollywood Hamilton Clothing? Was it because there's obviously different options you have, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you could start a fish market or whatever it is, you know what I mean? But what really led you in the direction of I want to make clothes and I want to make a clothing brand, and what was the thought process behind that?
Yeah. So if you think about it, when I kind of said, hey, there's some turning points of where my entrepreneurial mind was, at the time, I knew nothing about clothing design. I knew nothing about manufacturing. I really knew nothing about even graphic design. None of those. This is going to date me a little bit here, but when I was in college, the college I went to was Stockton, right outside of Atlantic City. And at that time, there was, Ed Hardy was really, really big. The casinos were doing well. You would see it in the casino shops or the malls or whatever. I always had some influences of streetwear and brands like Obey, even some stuff like Diamond Supply, more skate, and some other. I always liked unique type stuff, kind of like the things that no one else had. But I obviously had Shepard Fairey and Obey. I always loved his designs, and there were certain things about certain brands, kind of like I said, that I either liked the style, but I didn't like the graphics, so the shirts didn't fit the way that I wanted. I was always a skinnier kind of kid, so everything was kind of baggy. So at that time, what kind of took the entrepreneurial mindset where I'm I'm in business, getting my degree. Why don't I just try and figure it out and make my own? Because for me, it was blending kind of those elements that I wanted in both. And I mean, looking back, probably our original t-shirts, I still thank all the people that actually bought them because I've evolved so much since then. But it's in that point in time, that was just this is groundbreaking, right? I made a shirt and I did it this certain way. And looking back, I'm our graphics could have been better here. The colors could have been more on point. Certain things, quality could have been there. And that to me, it was just kind of how it all came together. But yeah.
No, I feel one of the major common misconceptions when people just see people starting a brands, and obviously when they scroll through Hollywood Hamilton Clothing on Instagram, they see different models and people wearing your clothing and stuff, and they might think oh, this guy has a team behind him that's helping him work on stuff. Now, one of my questions is, do you have a team or do you handle majority of the operations for Hollywood Hamilton Clothing?
No, man. So right now, and this is again, everybody is different in their elements of where their career is and stuff like that, and I actually kind of play in my mind kind of the same thing here. But right now, it's 100% me. I am my team. I am my Instagram, my Facebook, the website, design, building relationships with manufacturers, sourcing, everything. Now that kind of works two ways. My costs are low, so I can do it when I want at my leisure, right? If I had a full team and doing that stuff, if I have other commitments, now I have these other people tied. I will say in certain times I've built some good relationships and done collabs with some cool artists, or I hire graphic designers that I work with pretty consistently to build our stuff together. Because that helps me kind of save some of the time. I have it. They know exactly what I need. and I can use them in a freelance type way versus have a full team. But at that time, kind of I could scale the brand and we could be probably in a completely different spot. You listen to something like 4 Hour Work Week and read those books, or just scaling your business in general. I probably, certain people will be like, you got to stop doing that. You got to stop doing this. But I'm in a good spot where I can kind of handle everything between real estate, between clothing, between that, and kind of do things at my leisure. But it definitely gets cumbersome. It definitely gets difficult. I definitely have people that, help me out. My fiance comes to all my events. That's you gotta have support to be able to do that, and to be able to kind of turn one switch on, turn one switch off, and to work. Early mornings, late nights. I'm a late night kind of guy. I think from staying with me, man. You walk by my office and it's 1 a.m. and
Exactly.
I'm just like, Tristan, you want to see these designs? Or Blake, you want to see these designs? And for me, that's you kind of know yourself. And right now, I wish I had a team because I think with all successful things, you look at whether it's a rapper, whether it's an artist. A lot of those guys, they're one face, but there's like 8-9 people around. So I could say like I maybe should have more of a team, but for right now, I think I handle it pretty well, kind of doing it like the solo effort. But yeah, when you see it, if you like a shirt, you can say, hey, I like this about it. You can tell me, hey, you need to change this, and I'll take it to heart to help make the product better. So I think that's the good part of kind of being the one-man show.
No, and it's funny that you say that, like, because I think honestly, like, I agree with you, like, on how you handle majority of those operations. I think that's probably one of the better routes to take when you first start anyway, just so you have an idea of how, like, different segments of a business actually work. Because it's like, if I want to start a media company, like, I want to know, like, how cameras work and all that different kind of stuff. I just don't want to hire staff, and then if something ever happens, like, I'm going to be the only one there, and I don't know how to actually work everything. So I think it is actually good for you to actually take ownership and actually learning the different aspects of the actual business before you actually start distributing the work to.
Well, you nailed it right there. You start to figure out like, hey, I'm really good at this, but I'm not good here.
Exactly.
And that's where you start to fine tune, where you don't want to just bring somebody on who's your best friend and you find out that you guys both do the same thing really well and you both have the same weaknesses.
Exactly.
If you start to figure out, hey, if I'm really good at this, but I'm not good at the camera. Then you start to fine tune, hey, I need the camera guy, and that's only gonna make my process that much better. So you start to bring in those added pieces. And I think for me, there's definitely some areas that, I've identified that I'm like, hey, I could definitely, that next stage is building somebody to help do this and help over here and, do these other small things that I don't want to take care of anymore, and have an assistant or whatever that is, just to make life easier sometimes. But yet, until you get in there, you have to identify those strengths and weaknesses first before you can hand out those duties to somebody else, because that might be more of a weakness.
Exactly.
If you don't know.
No, and it's funny, like, so what were while you're going throughout this journey of creating your brand and creating like the designs and like all that different kind of sort of stuff, were there any major hiccups along the way? Like, did you have any trials or tribulations when you were actually starting the brand? Like, because everything is not always smooth, like, because majority, like, when you're supporting a brand or when you're supporting someone's work, you typically just see the end result and you see the end product, but you don't see the actual work that goes behind it. So did you have any like hiccups along the way? Or
Absolutely, man. You talk to any entrepreneur, own business owner, you kind of build a ship sometimes and you do it while you're sailing, right? Like I'm big on podcasts and listening and learning from other guys in the industries or people who've kind of taken similar routes. And the Hundreds and Bobby Hundreds, he's got a podcast too and a book that I've read. And it was funny because even just learning of where they are compared to us, we're not even, in the same ballpark, but the same things that he had as a, multi-million-dollar brand and us starting up was the same things. I mean, if you look at, so many things that you just maybe don't think could happen. And you kind of look at something and as you refine your craft. For example, in clothing, to put something together, you do something called a tech pack, right? It basically outlines every detail, every thing that you're designing. In the beginning, let's say you're working and you start a brand, right? And you're like, hey, I found a t-shirt manufacturer. I want this color shirt. I want this material. I want this logo on it. You put in your bulk order for 100 or 1,000 pieces, and you get it back and you go, this isn't the color. This material isn't right. It's not the quality that I was expecting, and now I can't sell it for that price point. Those are things that you may not, understand until you actually live it. And now, I've had little details that maybe people don't even see that I look at and go, yeah, that wasn't the way it was supposed to turn out. But you know what? Like, it's not the end of the world. I've had, partnerships fall through in terms of like collabs. I've had my art stolen before, and you live and you learn. I've had, manufacturing gone wrong, timetables not where they're expected. And with those, you have to just deal with it. I've had batches of clothing that you go, hey, I can't use this. And that's to maintain brand integrity. And kind of going back to the Tech Pack thing is, when you look at all of those things, there is a reason when you start to get to a point where you refine your craft, you go, hey, I'm going to be really, really meticulous in all these things. And you're going to look at it and someone might go, well, why are you putting this? And why are you putting this detail here? And why does it say it has to be 2 inches right here? Because you go, when I didn't label that and say it needs to be 2 inches from this seam or that, you go, because I've learned from that. And I've had that mistake happen. And
I honestly think like trial and error is such like an important thing throughout that process, because even like what you're saying with your clothing stuff, like I've had to experience those same things with the podcast. Like, so my first episode, it was with my photographer Shakir, and it ended up being a teaser episode because I just messed up on so many things. Like the camera, so I didn't start the audio for the first 20 minutes of the episode. So for the first 20 minutes, the audio was from the cameras instead of the actual microphones because I didn't do a mic check when I started. And then at the last 30 minutes, the camera from my angle ended up just cutting off. So like, it's just one of those things, like once you actually start and you have these bumps and hiccups, what I do for every episode is I write down what went wrong and what can I improve on in the next episode. So I think trial and error is such like, it's a big thing. It's a big part of business and going throughout the motions when you are like in your journey, because once you adjust the things that you did mess up on, you're kind of going, you're furthering your position.
You're never going to be perfect,
Exactly,
right? If you're waiting for perfection, you're going to keep waiting.
Yeah.
Right? Like we talked about earlier, if I looked at that shirt that I didn't put out for the first time and I go, oh, it's not ready yet, and where would I have been? Maybe I was, over here and at this far of progress. And if I waited there, I'm always trying to refine our product. You'd be doing the same thing and going, well, the lighting's not right, or my studio's not how I want it to be. And you go, hey, you have to learn from all those things. And when you jump in and go through it, that's what makes you, grow. That's what pushes your boundaries. So I think for all of those things, when you learn from those mistakes, you're gonna go through it. You're gonna do that. And it's how you handle them and how you grow from that and hope that you don't make that mistake again and go, how do I do that better?
Right. If you could give anyone advice that wanted to start a clothing brand right around now, like what's the best advice that you could give someone?
Sure.
As far as like the journey, because most people, like when they want to start a business, they think, oh, I could start and it'll be big within a year. But in reality, building a brand takes years and years of just consistency. So like what can you speak to in terms of
There's a couple things, man. When you look at brands, right, and clothes, some brands are focused on the quality of the materials, right? Some are very heavy on graphic design. It depends on where you're, what link in the chain are you really strong at? Because, for some of these things, what I would say to any person, you don't have to know day one, but you have to have an idea, right? At the end of the day, a piece of clothing, right, like a t-shirt, you're not reinventing the wheel. You're not creating like a Tesla that, hey, we're competing with, engine cars and now we're gonna have battery cars and we're gonna change the industry, right? For clothing, I have to kind of understand what my niche is. Am I streetwear? Am I casual? Am I surf? Am I more business oriented? There's so many different things that you have to kind of fine tune, right? Kind of understand there, and then understand the little elements like, well, am I really strong at, maybe my background was in screen printing, so I have that knowledge of screen printing and I'm gonna be good at that. Where it's like, well, I don't know about actually buying or creating cut and sew. So I have to get there. So for anyone looking to start like a t-shirt brand, what I would say is kind of get your brand idea together, who your customer is, because you want to make sure that like your product actually matches for what that client or customer or that environment or that genre want. And then start from there of, understanding the craft, where you talk about horizontal or vertical integration, right? Like you either are going back in the supply chain and being like, well, I'm going to do my own shirts. I'm going to create it and I'm going to keep working backwards. Where now, if I want to create my own shirt, I need to get into tech packs and I need to then know about materials. Or am I just going to go a certain way and look and go, well, I'm just going to create these kind of clothes, stay right here. For me, there are so many brands out there, and you'll hear it from certain people of like, clothing is definitely not cheap to get into, but there are people that, you could start it with $50, but you're not going to get obviously the same kind of traction or same kind of quality of having, some bigger dollars. What I will say is create, get out there and just keep refining your product. For me, I talk to so many people and I've helped other brands as well, where even if they're in streetwear, I'm in that mentality of, I look at, if we're all climbing ladders, I hope, if I get to a point where I could put you on a platform and I could pull you up a rung, I don't look at that as competition of, somebody that's trying to do better than me. Because at the end of the day, if we're all climbing our ladders and they pass me, their product is probably better than mine. And maybe that should challenge me to rethink my product. So I think for that is go out there, put yourself out there, create those, whether it's t-shirts, the designs, find your elements of what you're good at, and then ask for feedback from your friends, family, potential customers, because that's going to really refine how you display that product, how you build your product, and what your product really means to them. But you gotta just get out there and do it. So don't overthink things, just put it out.
No, definitely. I think also another big thing too is taking action on certain things, because I feel like one thing a lot of people do is they do a lot of planning, and I feel like you have to have a healthy balance of the two. But I've had times before, like years ago, where I was just planning on starting something, but all I was doing was just planning and I wasn't taking like any action. But I think once you actually start to take action and put forth actual work, then you start to see results and you get to just kind of move in a different direction. Like even with the podcast, like when I started, like when I was wondering like how I wanted to brand it or what was my niche and those different sort of things, like I was asking myself like all those different kinds of questions. But I got to the point where I was like, let's actually start recording some episodes and just not winging it, but just
see where it goes.
Different topics, exactly, just to see like where the podcast could go and kind of how the brand is going to be. And even just thinking about this, because this podcast is going to be like a lifetime kind of project sort of thing. Like I plan on doing this for the next like 10 years, probably even more. You know what I mean? Just because I just love doing it. But where do you kind of see Hollywood Hamilton Clothing going in the next 10 years? Is this like a lifelong project that you want to do, or?
It's kind of funny because I think about that stuff all the time. As 18-year-old George is different than the George I am today. And for me, as we've kind of talked about some of the other marketing things, and from some of the products we put out, we did carpets, right? We did home decor, we did murals, we did stuff like that. Where it's kind of funny because even probably 2 or 3 years ago, from doing some of the fashion shows we've done and some of the products we put out, I look back and go, man, that wasn't even like an inkling. But the cool thing is as I've gotten into real estate and done some of that stuff, like I look at almost, could Hollywood Hamilton be more than clothing, but lifestyle? I mean, you see me, our whole brand design and what it's about is kind of like that lifestyle, right? Whether it's clothing, whether it's cars, whether it's finance, it's kind of an overarching, clothing isn't just one aspect of you. It kind of defines who you are in a way.
Exactly.
Certain people may look at it and go, yeah, I'm a black and white t-shirt kind of guy, but other people might go, these Jordans, describe who I am in a nutshell. So for me, it's kind of cool because as I've gotten more into real estate, I almost look at Hollywood Hamilton as potentially coming more of design. And incorporating some of that and becoming more lifestyle than more than just clothing. from lifestyle things, whether it's home decor, whether it's the cars and that kind of stuff, where I look at that and kind of how does it blend together? I think all of that is more than just clothing. So for us is obviously, hey, stepping outside of my element and, you know, building products that we didn't before, refining our product. But I think it's more of where I could see ourselves going is kind of intertwining all those aspects of life and making it not just about clothing, but it's about you and how you live everything. Whether, you know, your home decor says something about, you know, who you are as a person and what you like and what your interests are, the same way that, you know, you wear your clothes, right? Like I'm a big sneaker guy. So, you know, sneaker displays and having your own, you know, way that people showcase their sneakers that they don't wear versus the ones that you do wear, that ties together. So I think for me, it's all, you know, we turned my R8 from a regular R8 into what I called it is like street art, right? Like literally street art of, you know, kind of tying these different things and taking something that isn't a canvas and into a canvas, but building and tying in, you know, the clothing and that lifestyle together. So I just see that kind of coming more and more kind of full circle. You know, even, you know, we talked about Airbnbs, like doing a full like HH inspired Airbnb and tying it in together where we talk, you obviously know my fiance, she sells real estate. I was like, hey, you know, you think of fashion designers and they always come up with different runway shows. I was like, I want to tie a house sale and a showing or an open house into like almost like a fashion show in the same way, where when you open up the kids' closet, it's got a kid's clothing and you can get a feel for who or what that kid's style would be. And you walk in the master bedroom and the clothes are displayed with the new stuff in there. So it's kind of tying in a traditional, how would I see this house and go through the showing, but then almost look at it from a way of like, here's the new collection that's coming out and tying them together and doing something that's different. So I just look at, you know, how can I tie more of lifestyle stuff all together? So
now, one of the main things that really just fascinates like me about you the most is that like you're the epitome of like what a hustler really is. Like you do so many different things, like from shoes to like your job to even Hamilton Clothing and real estate. Like you just do so many different things, and I think you're like a prime example of like what it is for a person to have like multiple different streams of income and just capitalizing on top of that. But what really made you get into not selling real estate, but what made you get into real estate?
Sure. So I bought my first house almost 6 years ago. So looking back, I kind of say to myself, I wish I did it sooner. But kind of like what we talked about this whole time is once you start to find things that you enjoy, or looking at how much time do I have available? You know, what am I already kind of locked into? With real estate, that was kind of one of those things that once I got into it and understood, I kind of fell into, I guess, monetizing and being in real estate simply, kind of going back to UT. At the time, I was at UT, I had a roommate. We had just signed a new lease and I was already down here in Tampa. He was coming later on. And I was at that point where I'm like, hey, you know, we got to pay this month's rent coming up. And he was like, I'm not coming down. I'm not going to be coming down for another couple months. And it was like, well, we already have to pay for this one. So I was like, listen, kind of looking at entrepreneurial mindset, I was like, why don't I do this? This is the infancy. This was maybe 7 years ago. So Airbnb has changed so much from like literally being like a couch you can sleep on to now it's almost like a hotel.
Right.
But for that, I was like, why don't I just Airbnb your room? If whatever I get, you just pay the difference of your half. So that way you don't have to pay all of that rent. And he was like, deal. Well, I put it up on Airbnb. And at the time, I don't even think I was allowed to in my apartment complex, but I'm like, I'll ask for forgiveness later.
Right.
And I was making more money than what his half of the rent was. And I was like, man, do I really even need a roommate at this point? Obviously, you know, when he came down, it kind of opened my eyes to, hey, this is pretty easy. I'm meeting cool people. And again, like-minded people. Because if you're staying in like a college guy's apartment, you can obviously expect what the house is going to look like or the apartment. And from there, it was like, oh, well, okay, I can rent these places out. And then once I got into real estate, again, there's so many different aspects that you can, kind of get into. It's like, yeah, you can flip houses, you can do all the work and hold it for a couple months and get rid of it versus, renting something and holding the property and watching the value appreciate. My biggest thing, I'm a big proponent of just buying real estate in the fact that when you're in, a rent in an apartment or a condo or whatever it is, that money just goes out the door every day. Every time that you can get, a rental property and even just you living there, it's still appreciating on the back end. So by doing nothing, just paying your mortgage, you're still making some money and putting some of that back in your pocket. So once you kind of, get your first house and you go, it's appreciated how much already? Right. We sold a couple and ran a couple Airbnbs. I've gotten my brother involved, my fiance involved. If you have a friend that's selling real estate, maybe you can cut a deal with them to lessen some of the fees for when you sell it, or get somebody involved to help run it with you. There's definitely some ways that if you collect a check by really not doing anything, that kind of fits into what are you doing if you have to work a 9 to 5? I can't take another job because I'm already tied into these hours. What can I do supplementally? And that's kind of how I've looked at a lot of different things where if you kind of look at all of the things I'm involved in, they all kind of intertwine either based off of necessity or they're based off of how they all kind of come together and are almost integral to each other, right? If we talk about real estate, it was a necessity that I needed a place, and I was kind of tied into working a 9 to 5, building the brand, and I'm like, I can't spend more time doing this. But once you had that rent check coming in and you go, hey, I just sit back and collect the check.
Right.
You start to realize like, hey, I can take that, deploy more money in there and keep building it. And then the same thing with shoes. You go, well, I got to do photo shoots for my brand and I have to have a brand image. And one of the things that I've always tried to do with Hollywood Hamilton is you may not hear of my brand, right? And we kind of tap in, we're definitely a streetwear brand. And for a new customer, what are certain things that we can relate to, right? If I'm competing with a Stussy or Diamond Supply or Dope or, the hundreds, brands that I'm supportive of at the same time is if you look at that, what's something that we can be connected to? Sneakers. Sneakers is part of your look.
Definitely.
But we're not obviously in a sneaker space. But if you see somebody out, you can respect somebody's sneakers. And how that kind of plays in with me is I look at sneakers more than just a sneaker. I look at it as art. I look at it as, a podium to kind of speak who you are as a person. But it's also a great connector for branding and development, because if I can do a social media post and I can wear a certain shoe and you don't know who my brand is, but you know that sneaker and you go, oh, he's wearing the Fear of God ones, or he's wearing the, Grateful Dead SBs, right? Or the Chunky Dunkies, right away, you're like, this guy and me can relate. We're sneakerheads.
Right.
And you might be drawn in from the shoe, but then it kind of goes deeper where it goes into your whole look. Right? And you go, man, I can respect the shoe. And now I'm introducing that. So for real estate, it all just kind of tied in where, again, when I was doing Airbnbs, I literally had almost clothing setups and stuff like that into my Airbnbs. So my Airbnbs became my customers, which then branched out to not just Tampa, but when they came and visited, they went and placed their
different places. Exactly.
It planted those seeds back. So if you look at everything full circle, they all tie in to the bank gives me the ability to fund my business when maybe the business is in a startup phase. To the Airbnb can give me potential new customers. To the shoes isn't just a sunk cost. I can use it for the promos and the modeling, but then I can also build it to get some marketing back. So they're all integral parts and they all move together. And when I get into something, it kind of has a arm somewhere else, or it's linked together. And when you start to see that ecosystem combined, it feels natural to me.
Now, are you like a big believer in just like the universe? Like sometimes things just happen for a reason. Like, cause even just listening like to your story, like it's pretty amazing. Like even just your story and like how you got into real estate, because it was in a way like a mistake. Like your guy didn't show up and you needed to figure out a way to cover his part of the rent. And even with the finance thing, like you didn't, like it wasn't really until you got into that finance competition where you got into that industry. So like, are you like, because I'm a big believer in just like things just happen for a reason sometimes. And even it just sounds like that's kind of where life is kind of taking you in a way. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, man. I think my best way to explain it for me is, you know, if you think of like Michael Jordan, you miss, you know, every shot that you don't take, right?
Exactly.
In that aspect, I think just showing up. You know, if people say, oh, you're lucky, or hey, this guy's catching all these breaks. Think about all the breaks that no one ever saw you take, right? Or the events that you might have went to, or like me, it's like, how many events did you go to that you had no sales, or it wasn't the turnout that you expected, but you just showed up time and time again? I think that's a big thing of, you know, not to say like things happen. I think the more times that you give yourself a chance for things to happen, they will, right? Like
Definitely.
it's odds. If you just said, hey, I hope I'm going to get my big break tomorrow, I'm going to do one podcast, is that going to happen? But if I do 1,000 and somebody sees that one, that's going to give you the opportunity for those doors to open up. So I just kind of look at, you know, we all go through ebbs and flows of inspiration, and not to say self-doubt, but you go, man, I'm not inspired this week, or I need new energy and I need to figure out what's going to drive me again. But, you know, just keep finding those things and keep doing that. I think things will happen. So
now, I think one of the main questions I did want to ask you, just because you are kind of involved in real estate, because I feel like another common misconception is that people feel like they need like hundreds of thousands of dollars to like really hop right into real estate. Like, if you could give your best estimate, obviously like it really just depends on the actual deal, how much the house is and the location it's in. But like, if you could give like a good estimate on like how much money someone would need to get started in real estate, what would your best opinion on that would be?
So think about it this way. We kind of talked about either renting or your first home or whatever it is, right? It's minimal. It's kind of funny. Obviously, if you're flipping a house, you know, you got to put 20% down. It's investment property. But let's say you get your first house, depending on, you know, your credit and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, that's a big piece of making sure you can get a house. But you got to think, if you rent a spot, right? You have to have like your first month's rent. You got to have your security deposit.
Exactly.
I mean, Tampa's growing, but it's still, you know, there's some expensive spots. You might be dropping 10 grand just to lock in your apartment.
Right.
But you got to think, your apartment may be a 1 or 2 bedroom, 1,000 square feet. You can get a conventional loan and put like 5% down, or you can get a FHA loan, put 3.5% down. Do the math, right?
Exactly.
If you buy a $200,000 house, it may not be, you know, the house that you want, or it might not compare to the apartment complex that you thought you wanted to be in, that has all those amenities. But you got to think, that guy's losing, right, every month what he's putting into his rent. But if you bought that $200,000 house, you're talking $7 grand that you got to put down plus closing. So if you had to put $10,000 into that apartment, you can put $10,000, you know, or upwards of 15, you know, let's say 15,000, you know, if you want to do some reno or, you know, make some updates or something like that. It's kind of the same thing, right? You don't have to have 20% down. That's a, you know, me being a banker of kind of knowing is, it's good because if you put 20% down, you don't have what's called PMI, which is mortgage insurance, that premium. So you're going to pay a little bit more, but you still got to think you're putting roughly around 1/3 of every one of your mortgage payments is going to your mortgage. The other, it's all front loaded on interest. But with interest rates being so low right now, you're still putting a good portion into it. So you can still, you know, get a house, and it may not be your investment property. But think of it this way. You're young, you might have a buddy, hey, they pay you a little bit of rent. It saves you, it saves them. It's a win-win. So you can get into real estate pretty easy. And what I always say is, you know, having one of your buddies as like kind of your first tenant, it's good because you start to realize like, hey, if I want to get into, you know, being a quote unquote landlord, because like you're going to know like, hey, is my buddy going to pay me on time? Right. How do I handle confrontation? You know, I don't have to essentially support and float a whole house at that point, because it's not just where am I going to find renters and what happens if something breaks? You're there, you can see it. So it's a nice first step in to say, hey, do I want to get into this? So, I mean, for minimal dollars, you know, when you buy a house, it's at no cost. The sellers, pay the commissions of the real estate agents. So, you call up somebody and say, hey, I want to buy a house. With an FHA loan, you can get in pretty low, 3.5%.
Now, if you could kind of give an idea, so like for me, like how I kind of see my life kind of being planned out, the 3 different ways I primarily just want to make money is through real estate, podcasting, and then I also want to start a tech company later down the future when I start like getting more settled, right? But if you could give like different things people could do to help improve their lives financially, like what are those different things people should be investing in? Should it be stocks, cryptos, or real estate, or whatever it is? Like what would your top like 3 be?
Looking at what we talked here today, right? Like we've kind of talked all different industries.
Exactly.
I think if anything, number one, I would say be passionate about something. If it's real estate, if it's crypto, if it's stocks, any of that stuff is have some knowledge, right? Like the biggest thing, like if it's sneakers, there's money to be made in sneakers if you understand, what sneakers increase in value, which ones aren't gonna appreciate. The same thing with like a crypto. I look at a lot of those as I'm not heavy in crypto. I'm not against them, but I would say like, hey, if we're gonna go that route, go into something that's a little bit more, I'd say, established, like a Bitcoin. You can get into a lot of these like pump and dump type, crazy, altcoins. I'm not big on that because for me, I'd rather have something that's more stable, and you can find some really cool stocks. The cool thing is, like, whether it's a watch, right, that's going to appreciate in value, or a sneaker, depends on how hands-on you want to be, right? Like, if you're not knowledgeable about stocks, you can buy like an ETF, which bunches a couple of stocks together that you don't have to pinpoint and say, these 5 stocks are all going to be big. You can pick an industry. Like, I'm pretty big on like gaming or the semiconductors, some of those industries. And you can buy, essentially a bunch of different companies at once, test your feet and, get your feet wet in those. The same way, I think, like, if we go back to Bitcoin, it's a little bit more stable, right? Like, it's still gonna be all over the place, where you have to assess your risk and how tolerable you wanna be. What I would say is you have to look at certain elements of how liquid you wanna be versus how much risk you can tolerate. So, for example, if this is money that you're like, hey, I might need it in 3 months or 6 months, or I might need tomorrow, your best bet may be more liquid asset, such as like even a savings account. Savings account aren't great, but you're gonna get like a flat rate interest, or put them in stocks that maybe don't fluctuate as much, right? If you are like, hey, I might need that cash tomorrow, you don't want to put it in Bitcoin if Bitcoin goes down 20%, right? Because then that's not a good investment.
Right.
But if you know this is money that I have sitting aside, and I go, you know what, I'm willing to lose all of it, you can put it in something that's a little bit more risk, I guess, to be able to waver and kind of, handle those big shifts. It all depends. From a financial standpoint, what I would say is, number one, build your credit and start early. I think the biggest thing there, if you can get a credit card, you have to, again, if we're going back to like know who you are as a person, if you can't wake up at 6 and think you're going to start your own company, the same thing is get a credit card. Do not go and max that thing out. What you would do is treat it like a debit card, use your credit card, spend only the things that you would, pay it off every month, start to build your credit, right? When you start to do all of those, that's going to help build your interest rate to be lower when you buy a house. It's going to help you to start spending in the ways that you go, I'm not getting into debt. There's debt, and with interest rates so low, if you're taking debt is not bad if you're building it and taking the debt on asset building debt. Student debt, right? Pro and con. Obviously, you're getting a degree, but that's never going to have a return. But if you're taking debt, good debt on a house, you have some sort of return that should be there. So kind of understanding asset building debt, and then understanding kind of my liquidity and where I want to be. There's a couple different avenues that you can play a little bit safer versus other stuff that you can say, hey, I might hit it big, but there's more risk, right? More risk, more reward. So
no, definitely. I feel like one of the big things is that most people should do is like take the time to actually learn whatever it is you want to get into, if it's stocks, ETFs, or even real estate, like actually take the time to learn what it is before you just hop right into it so you can make good decisions and just good picks on what you want to do. But yeah, I really agree with you on all the advice you give for just at least that aspect. But I really do appreciate you coming out, man, for this episode.
Of course, man.
Of course, but
Always a pleasure.
Yes, sir. But I'm gonna make sure I put your links for your website and your Instagram and all your socials within the episode and in the descriptions. But this was the this is the 8th episode of the Blake Edwards podcast. I hope you guys really enjoyed the show. We talked about a lot of neat different stuff, so I hope you guys got as much information out of it as you could. But shout out to all the dads, shout out to all the entrepreneurs, creators, shout out to all the moms, shout out to anyone out there who's just trying to make ends meet, all that good stuff. But so we're out of here though.
Take care.
Yes, sir.
Oh, dude, you killed it, man.
Yeah. No, I know.